Look at the cover of any major business magazine today. You see the smiling faces of tech billionaires. You read about the massive IPOs, the billion-dollar acquisitions, and the flawless corporate strategies. Society has sold us a highly sanitized, perfectly packaged myth. We are taught that successful companies begin with a genius visionary who writes a flawless 50-page business plan, secures millions of dollars from investors on day one, and marches confidently in a straight line toward unimaginable wealth. That is a complete, utter lie. Welcome to the Book Vault. Founders at Work by Jessica Livingston. Jessica Livingston is a founding partner of Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in the world. She sat down with the founders of companies like Apple, PayPal, Hotmail, and Craigslist, and she asked them one simple question: what was it actually like in the very beginning? The answers she received completely shattered the polished PR narratives of Silicon Valley. She discovered that the early days of a startup are not glamorous. They are messy. They are chaotic. The founders had no idea what they were doing. They were constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. They built the wrong products, they fought with their co-founders, and they survived entirely by accident and sheer, brute force perseverance. Over the next 3 sessions, we are going to rewire your understanding of how massive wealth and innovation are truly created. Chapter 1: The Master Plan Fallacy. If you want to build a massive company, conventional wisdom dictates that you must start with a master plan. You spend 6 months writing a massive document. You calculate your total addressable market. You build a 5-year financial forecast. You design a complex corporate structure. Jessica Livingston's interviews reveal a shocking truth: almost none of the billion-dollar founders started with a master business plan. In fact, spending months writing a business plan is often a form of sophisticated procrastination. Why do business plans fail in the startup world? Because a master plan assumes that you can accurately predict the future. It assumes you know exactly what the customer wants before you have even built the product. When you are launching something completely new, you are operating in a state of absolute unknown. Your financial projections are nothing but fictional numbers typed into a spreadsheet. Livingston contrasts the corporate mindset with the founder mindset. Look at the story of Steve Wozniak, the technical genius who co-founded Apple with Steve Jobs. Did Wozniak sit down and say, "I am going to build a multi-billion-dollar consumer electronics empire to revolutionize global computing"? Absolutely not. Wozniak built the Apple I computer for one reason: he wanted to show off to his friends at the Homebrew Computer Club. He was working at Hewlett-Packard at the time, and he built the computer purely for fun, giving away his schematics for free. It was a hobby. It was a side project. It was Steve Jobs who looked at the hobby and said, "Wait, we can sell this." If Wozniak had tried to write a 5-year corporate business plan, the Apple computer never would have existed. He just started building. Chapter 2: Scratching your own itch. If you don't start with a business plan, how do you find a billion-dollar idea? Amateur entrepreneurs sit in coffee shops and try to invent problems. They ask themselves, what does the global market want right now? How can I create a disruptive AI blockchain paradigm shift? They try to build products for a theoretical audience they do not understand. The master founders in Livingston's book did the exact opposite. They did not search the market for a problem. They solved a problem that was driving them absolutely crazy. This is the ultimate heuristic of startup creation: scratch your own itch. When you try to build a product for someone else, you have to guess what they want. You have to hire focus groups. You have to run surveys. But when you build a product to solve your own problem, you are user number 1. You possess perfect, flawless data about what the product needs to do. If the product is clunky, you know it instantly. If a feature is useless, you delete it. Your intuition replaces expensive market research. Look at Paul Graham, who founded a company called ViaWeb, which was later bought by Yahoo and became Yahoo Store. In the mid-1990s, if a small business wanted to sell products on the internet, it was a nightmare. You had to hire incredibly expensive consultants, buy physical servers, and write complex custom code just to set up a basic web page. Paul Graham and his co-founder Robert Morris didn't write a business plan about the future of e-commerce. They simply wanted to make it easier to put things online. They built a piece of software that allowed anyone to generate an online store using a regular web browser, without knowing any code. They scratched their own itch. They built the tool they wished existed. And it turned out, thousands of other small businesses were desperate for that exact same tool. Chapter 3: The Power of Naivete. We arrive at the most counterintuitive, fascinating psychological discovery in Jessica Livingston's book. If you want to disrupt an entire global industry, it is often a massive disadvantage to be an expert in that industry. The founders who changed the world possessed a specific, almost terrifying psychological trait, naivete. They were profoundly, beautifully ignorant. When you spend 20 years working in a traditional corporate industry, you memorize all the rules. You know the exact way things are supposed to be done. More importantly, you know all the reasons why a new idea will fail. If you tell an industry expert a radical new idea, their brain instantly generates a list of obstacles. They think about the regulatory hurdles, the massive costs, and the historical failures. The expert's knowledge paralyzes them. They talk themselves out of innovating before they even begin. The outsider, the naive founder, does not know the rules. Because they do not know the rules, they are not afraid to break them. Because they do not know a problem is supposed to be impossible, they accidentally solve it. Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith were two young engineers working at a tech company in the 1990s. They wanted to start a company together. Their original idea was a web-based database called JavaSoft. They needed to communicate with each other during the workday to build the business plan, but their corporate employer had a strict firewall that prevented them from using personal email accounts. They were incredibly frustrated. They couldn't email each other. Then, they had an epiphany: what if we built an email system that lived entirely on a web browser, so it could bypass the corporate firewall? They didn't know anything about the massive, entrenched telecommunications industry. They didn't know that providing free email to millions of people would require unimaginable server costs. They were completely naive to the economic nightmare of scaling a free service. If they had been telecommunications experts, they would have realized the server costs would bankrupt them, and they never would have started. But because they were naive, they just built it to solve their own communication problem. They called it Hotmail. It exploded. Millions of users signed up. The server costs were a nightmare, but the user growth was so astronomical that they were able to raise millions in venture capital to keep the servers running. Eventually, they sold Hotmail to Microsoft for $400 million. Chapter 4: The Pivot. You launched your product. You built exactly what you thought the market wanted. And the market responds with absolute, devastating silence. No one signs up. No one pays. The amateur founder looks at this silence and does one of two things: they either quit entirely, concluding that the business world is rigged. Or, out of pure ego, they refuse to change the product, convinced that the market is just too stupid to understand their genius. They ride the ship down to the bottom of the ocean. The master founder executes the pivot. A pivot is a fundamental shift in the core business strategy, driven by the realization that your original idea was wrong, but the technology or the team you built might be perfectly suited for something else. There is no greater example of the pivot in modern business history than PayPal. When Max Levchin and Peter Thiel started the company, it was not called PayPal. It was called Confinity. And it had absolutely nothing to do with web-based consumer payments. Levchin was a cryptography genius. Their original idea was to build security software for handheld devices, specifically the Palm Pilot. They built the software. They pitched it. No one cared. The business was failing. But while they were building the security software, they built a tiny side feature, a way to securely beam an IOU, money, from one Palm Pilot to another using infrared ports. They noticed that while nobody cared about the cryptography software, people were slightly interested in the money beaming feature. So, they swallowed their ego. They threw away their original business plan and executed pivot number 1. They abandoned pure cryptography and rebranded as a Palm Pilot money transfer service. But there was a problem. Palm Pilots were niche devices. The market was too small. To help people sync their Palm Pilot accounts, Levchin built a simple website where users could log in and see their balances on the internet. He added a basic feature that allowed users to email money to each other via the website, just as a backup tool for the Palm Pilot. Suddenly, they noticed an anomaly in their server data. The website was exploding. People on a weird new auction site called eBay had discovered the email money feature. eBay buyers and sellers were using it to pay each other instantly, bypassing the Palm Pilot entirely. The founders faced a critical, ego-crushing decision. Their entire identity was built around the Palm Pilot. But the market was screaming at them that the web was the future. They executed pivot number 2. They abandoned the Palm Pilot. They doubled down entirely on the web-based email payment system. They renamed the service PayPal. It became a multi-billion-dollar financial empire. Chapter 5, The Cockroach Strategy. You are pivoting. You are trying to find product-market fit. But the clock is ticking. Your bank account is draining. You are exhausted, your server bills are due, and your investors are demanding updates. During the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, thousands of startups evaporated overnight because their venture capital funding dried up. They were built like exotic, fragile racehorses. The exact second they stopped being fed millions of dollars, they died. Paul Graham, the co-founder of Y Combinator, analyzed the startups that actually survived the nuclear winter of the market crash. They were not racehorses. They were cockroaches. A cockroach is the most resilient creature on Earth. It can survive radiation. It can survive freezing temperatures. It can survive for weeks without a head. In the startup world, the cockroach strategy means designing your company so that it is mathematically and psychologically impossible for you to be killed by external circumstances. Startups rarely die because a competitor beats them. They rarely die because the market shifts. Startups die because the founders give up. When you run out of money, the company does not technically end. The company only ends if you choose to stop typing code and go get a corporate job. If you refuse to quit, the company is still alive. The Cockroach Survival Protocol. To guarantee your survival through the grueling, brutal months of finding product market fit, you must execute the 3 pillars of the cockroach strategy. 1. Become default alive, burn rate 0. Racehorses need millions of dollars to pay for fancy offices, marketing teams, and corporate retreats. Cockroaches eliminate all expenses. You work out of a garage. You eat cheap noodles. You do not hire employees, you automate or do the work yourself. If your monthly expenses are practically zero, you can survive indefinitely without investor funding. You are default alive. 2. Do things that don't scale, unrelenting resourcefulness. Amateurs try to automate customer acquisition on day 1. Cockroaches survive by doing unscalable, brutal, manual labor. When the founders of Airbnb couldn't get traction, they didn't buy Facebook ads. They physically flew to New York, knocked on the doors of their users, and took professional photographs of the apartments themselves. You physically drag your company to survival, one customer at a time. 3. Anchor to the mission, not the ego, the psychological anchor. When you are a cockroach, people will mock you. Your friends with safe corporate jobs will tell you that you are wasting your life. If your ego is tied to looking successful, you will quit to save face. You must anchor your psychology entirely to solving the problem. A cockroach has no ego, it only has the relentless drive to survive and build. When you operate as a cockroach, you become the most terrifying competitor in the market. Massive corporations cannot compete with you, because they require massive profits to justify their existence. You require nothing but oxygen and a keyboard. You outlast the enemy simply by refusing to die. Chapter 6, Product over PR. If you want to spot an amateur founder who is destined to fail, look at their calendar. The amateur founder is obsessed with what Jessica Livingston calls playing house. Playing house is the act of imitating the superficial behaviors of successful companies, without doing the brutal, invisible work that actually creates a successful company. The amateur spends their time designing a beautiful corporate logo. They order expensive business cards with CEO printed on them. They attend 3 networking events a week. They obsess over getting an article written about them in a tech magazine. They issue press releases. They are optimizing for the illusion of success. Press and PR are the most dangerous drugs in the entrepreneurial world. When a journalist writes a flattering article about your startup, your brain receives a massive spike of dopamine. Your parents call to congratulate you. Your friends tell you that you are going to be a billionaire. You feel like you have won the game. But PR is completely fake momentum. An article in a magazine does not fix the bugs in your software. A launch party does not improve your user retention rate. A fancy logo does not make the customer's life easier. Many of the founders in Livingston's book admitted that the exact moments they received the most glowing press coverage were the exact moments their companies were internally falling apart. What did the master founders, the creators of Apple, Hotmail, and ViaWeb, obsess over? They ignored the press. They ignored networking events. They stripped their daily schedule down to the only 2 activities that actually generate value in the early days of a startup. 1. Writing code, building the product. 2. Talking to users. That is it. Everything else is a lethal distraction. If you are not actively building the product, or actively talking to a user to find out why they hate the product so you can fix it, you are wasting your time. Look at Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist. Craigslist is one of the most trafficked websites in the history of the internet. It destroyed the multi-billion-dollar newspaper classified ad industry. Did Craig Newmark hire a massive PR firm? Did he host lavish launch parties? No. Craig was a profoundly introverted software engineer. For years, he sat alone at his computer, listening to user feedback, writing code, and personally moderating the community. The website design was incredibly ugly, just plain blue text on a white background. It looked like a relic from 1995. But Craig understood the ultimate law of business: if the product solves a massive problem, the users will do the marketing for you. He didn't need a PR strategy. His users loved the site so much that they told everyone they knew. The ugly, unpolished, user-obsessed product defeated beautifully designed, heavily funded competitors because it actually worked. You have survived the crucible. You know how to pivot when the market rejects you. You possess the psychological armor of the cockroach. And you have eliminated the lethal distraction of playing house, focusing entirely on the raw utility of the product. You are no longer just surviving. You are beginning to grow. But as the company scales, a new set of terrifying challenges emerges. How do you survive the darkest psychological phase of the startup journey, the legendary trough of sorrow? What happens when you have to hire your first 50 employees, and how do you protect the fragile, vital culture of the garage from becoming a bloated, bureaucratic nightmare? And finally, what is the ultimate, unifying characteristic, the unstoppable internal engine, that separates the founders who changed the world from those who faded into obscurity? In Part 3, the grand finale of this Saransh masterclass, we will navigate the chaotic transition from a scrappy garage project to a scaling empire. We will decode the mindset of elite scaling, the preservation of culture, and the brutal reality of the founder's burden. The product is built. Now, we scale the empire. Chapter 7, The Trough of Sorrow. There is a famous graph in Silicon Valley used to describe the emotional life cycle of a startup. It begins with the TechCrunch of initiation, the day you launch. You get a spike of press, a rush of dopamine, and a surge of early users. You feel like a genius. But the press cycle fades. The novelty wears off. The graph violently crashes downward into a long, dark, endless valley known as the trough of sorrow. Amateurs believe that once a company achieves product-market fit and raises millions of dollars, the stress disappears. Jessica Livingston's interviews reveal the exact opposite. When you scale, the problems do not go away, the problems multiply, and the stakes become terrifying. Millions of users on eBay started using PayPal. The user graph was going vertical. The venture capitalists were throwing millions of dollars at them. It looked like an unstoppable triumph. But behind the scenes, PayPal was bleeding to death. Because PayPal was moving real money across the internet, they became the #1 target for international organized crime. Russian hackers realized they could use stolen credit cards to funnel millions of dollars through PayPal accounts. At the height of their user growth, PayPal was losing so much money to fraud that they were weeks away from complete, catastrophic bankruptcy. The very scale that made them famous was about to kill them. Max Levchin didn't attend networking events. He didn't call a PR firm. He went to war. Levchin slept under his desk for weeks. He led a team of engineers in a frantic, 24/7 sprint to build a highly advanced, AI-driven fraud detection system. They named the algorithm Gigor, after a prolific Russian hacker who had been taunting them. The algorithm worked. It identified the fraudulent transactions, froze the criminal accounts, and stopped the bleeding. But think about the psychological toll. Levchin was not sleeping. The pressure was unimaginable. If he failed to write the correct code, a company valued at hundreds of millions of dollars would vanish overnight. Chapter 8, Protecting the Culture. You survived the trough of sorrow. The product is scaling. Now, you have too much work, and not enough people. You have to hire. When you go from 5 founders in a garage to 50 employees in an office building, the company faces its greatest existential threat. It is not a threat from a competitor. It is a threat from the inside. If you are not ruthless, your scrappy, fast-moving pirate ship will be infected by corporate creep, and it will slowly devolve into a bloated, slow, bureaucratic nightmare. The laws of cultural preservation. Jessica Livingston discovered that the founders who successfully scaled their empires shared a violent, almost paranoid obsession with protecting their company culture. To survive the transition from garage to empire, you must enforce 3 absolute laws of hiring. 1. Hire builders, not managers, the anti-corporate filter. In the early days, do not hire people who manage processes. Hire people who actually build the product. If an executive comes to you from a massive Fortune 500 company, they are used to having an army of assistants and a massive budget. In a startup, there are no assistants. If the VP of marketing cannot sit down and physically write the ad copy themselves, they are useless to you. 2. Fire toxic brilliance instantly, the law of contagion. You will eventually hire a brilliant jerk. They write flawless code or close massive sales, but they demean their coworkers, play office politics, and act arrogant. You must fire them immediately. Culture is defined by the worst behavior you are willing to tolerate. If you allow toxic brilliance to remain, the humble, hardworking builders will leave. Toxicity is a virus, cut it out before it spreads. 3. Protect the flat hierarchy, the hacker ethos. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak fought desperately to keep Apple feeling like the homebrew computer club even as it became a massive corporation. You must eliminate middle management wherever possible. The engineers and the creators must have a direct line of communication to the CEO. When a company requires 5 layers of approval to change the color of a button, the hackers leave, and the company dies of stagnation. Guy Kawasaki, one of the original Apple employees, described this phenomenon perfectly. He called it the bozo explosion. Players, elite, confident masters of their craft, always hire other players, because they are not intimidated by brilliance. They want to be surrounded by the best. But if you accidentally hire a B player, the B player gets insecure. They are terrified that someone smarter will take their job. So, the B player hires C players. And the C players hire D players. Within a year, your entire organization is flooded with mediocre, insecure bureaucrats who spend 100% of their energy playing office politics to protect their jobs. That is the bozo explosion. Chapter 9, The Founder's Burden. We arrive at the final, ultimate truth of the entrepreneurial journey. Why do they do it? Why would a human being subject themselves to the terror of the garage, the agony of the pivot, the nightmare of the trough of sorrow, and the crushing weight of leading hundreds of employees? The media tells us they do it for the money. We assume that the ultimate goal of starting a company is to ring the bell at the IPO, buy a private jet, and retire on a beach in the Bahamas. Jessica Livingston's interviews shatter the myth of the money completely. When you read Founders at Work, a startling pattern emerges. When these founders finally sold their companies for hundreds of millions of dollars, when the massive check finally cleared the bank, they didn't feel euphoria. They felt a profound sense of emptiness. Evan Williams, who co-founded Blogger, and later Twitter, sold his company to Google. After the acquisition, he was wealthy beyond imagination. But within a few years, he left the safety and luxury of Google to start all over again from scratch. Why? Because he missed the garage. The people who change the world are not driven by greed. If you are only doing it for the money, you will quit during the trough of sorrow, because the pain is simply not worth the financial reward. The master founders are driven by something much deeper. They are driven by a ruthless, unshakable obsession with the puzzle. They look at the world, they see an inefficiency, and their brain literally cannot rest until they have built the machine that fixes it. Steve Wozniak just wanted to see if he could build a personal computer. Paul Graham just wanted to see if he could build a web store generator. Saber Badia just wanted to see if he could put email on a browser. They are hackers. They are builders. This obsession comes with a massive, terrifying burden. When you become a founder, you sacrifice your peace of mind forever. You do not clock out at 5 p.m. When you go to sleep, you are dreaming about server architecture. When you are at dinner with your family, you are thinking about payroll. You carry the financial livelihood of your employees on your back. It is a lonely, agonizing, beautiful existence. Conclusion, the final harvest. You have reached the end of the methodology. Look at the unglamorous, brutal, and beautiful reality of company creation you have uncovered over these 3 masterclass sessions. You have rejected the sanitized corporate myth. You know that master plans are useless, and that the greatest companies are born from the simple act of scratching your own itch. You have embraced the power of naivete, realizing that your ignorance of the industry is the exact weapon that allows you to break the rules. You have survived the crucible of execution. You know how to abandon your ego and execute the pivot when the market demands it. You have adopted the unkillable psychology of the cockroach strategy, dropping your burn rate to 0 and refusing to die. You have stopped playing house, ignoring the lethal distraction of PR to focus entirely on writing code and talking to users. And you are now armed to scale the empire. You are prepared for the nightmare of the trough of sorrow, knowing that growth brings a terrifying new set of problems. You know how to act as the gatekeeper of your culture, filtering out the toxic bureaucrats and hiring only the obsessed builders. And above all, you understand the founder's burden. You know that the money is an illusion. The true reward is the mastery of the puzzle. We look at the billionaires and the titans of Silicon Valley and we assume they are a different species. We assume they possess a magical genius that we lack. Jessica Livingston has handed you the ultimate, liberating truth. They are not magical. In the beginning, they were just as terrified, confused, and broke as you are right now. The only difference between a dreamer and a founder is the willingness to walk into the dark, filthy garage, sit down at the keyboard, and simply start building.